Okay. That should be working now. Baruch Hashem. That's all right. Thank you, Yankel, for letting us know. Okay, so there is a whole world of Jewish mysticism that's not in the Shulchan Aruch, right?
It's in the Sefer Yetzirah.
Right, but where does that come from?
Raziel, the angel, taught Adam Arisha and passed it down to.
Right, but the question is, how do we know that?
Amen.
How do we know that?
The Arizal.
I'm saying, but how
was taught by Eliyahu in the cave.
Right. So, but how do we know any of these things? And I'll ask you better. I'll ask you an even better question. Let's say in a Rabbi Shimon Yochai learned from Eliyahu Navi. How did Eliyahu Navi know it?
You have access to the spiritual code outside of the matrix, where you can see everything for what it is.
Okay, but what does that mean?
It's happening at the same time.
So, what?
The idea.
Not quite.
Okay, that's my guess.
What I'm hoping to at least begin to convince you of is that we have a very, very, very ancient tradition of knowing a lot of things, and it is possible not only to learn and understand these things, but also to understand how we understand these things. Meaning there is a system of mechanics behind the world of halacha that is well charted. Well charted. Somebody says to you, why is it that we don't eat milk with chicken? The Torah says, don't cook your kid in its mother's milk. What does that have to do with chicken parmesan?
Right? Chicken and meat look the same in the dark.
So we can trace it, right? We can trace not just that piece of it. We can trace. The Gemara tells us that that pasuk is said 3 times in the Torah, and each of those 3 times that the Torah repeats the same pasuk is to teach us 3 separate halachas. One is that there is a prohibition of eating basar b'challah. One is that there is a prohibition of cooking basar b'challah, and one is that there is a prohibition of benefiting from basar b'challah. And that we know from the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Moshe Rabbeinu was told that on Har Sinai. He told that to Yeshua, and Yeshua taught that to Klal Yisrael, the next generation, and the Bryson Maseches Erchin, about how Moshe Rabbeinu gave a shir in the Midbar. First he taught it. First Hashem taught it to him, and then he taught those halachas to Aaron, and then he repeated it again to Aaron and his sons, and then to Aaron and his sons, and to the Zakenim, which meant that everybody heard it 4 times over. And then people would keep on repeating these halachas, and they would sit down and they would ask questions. They would go back and forth. That's Ketzad Seder Mishnah. That's how the halachas were taught. So we know where Torah Sheba'al Peh comes from. The Rambam charts the list of every single generation, the links in the chain from Moshe Rabbeinu to himself. He can chart that, which means, by the way, that we can chart it as well. We can chart these things as well. And sometimes I do this with my Talmidim from time to time, that I've had the schus of learning from 2 primary Rebbeim in my life. I've had the schus of learning from Rabbi Mendel Blachman and Rabbi Rav Hershel Schachter. Rabbi Blachman learned from Rav Hutner. Rav Hutner learned from the Alter of Slobodka. The Alter of Slobodka, ultimately Slobodka, comes from Volozhin. Volozhin came from the Vilna Gaon. And the Vilna Gaon can trace himself back all the way to the Rishonim. And the same thing is true with Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik learned from his father, his father Reb Chaim. Also traces back to Volozhin to the Vilna Gaon. So we have that commonality. But there's another stream of thought that I've had the schus of learning from many Gedolim and Chachamim and Rebbeim in the world of Hasidus that goes Rebbe to Talmud all the way back to the Baal Shem Tov. And you can trace all the way back further from there. Meaning we can trace ourselves back, each one of us, hundreds of years and then thousands of years. We're not coming from nowhere, certainly in the world of halacha, but in the world of machshava, which includes philosophy and mysticism and agarata and anything non-halachic in Yiddishkeit, that is not nearly as well systematized, which means our understanding of what these things are is not easy to pinpoint, which is also why oftentimes you hear people say crazy things and people have no idea how to prove or disprove them. Sometimes you hear people talking things that sound fantastical, and this sounds bizarre and absurd, and why would that be true? Now, if somebody tells you a halacha that sounds insane, you say, where does that come from? And if they can't tell you where it comes from, and if you can't open up something in the world of halacha and point to it, you're like, well, then you're wrong. And that's easy. Meaning, in the world of legal understanding, either it's true or it's not true, or it's a debate, but it's got to be sourced somewhere. It's got to have a makar. As opposed to the world of machshava that doesn't really have the same systematization of where does this idea come from. We have the idea of Yud Gimel Midas Shar Torah Nidreshes Bahem, that there are 13 principles that we derive the halachas of the Torah Shebal Peh from the Torah Shebechsav. What principles do we have to derive machshava? Meaning, if somebody opens up a chumash and reads a story of Avram Avinu and comes to a conclusion, how do you know if that conclusion is right or wrong? And how do you know how to think about these things? I'll give you some devastating examples. A blunt reading of the Chumash might convince you that it is appropriate. That if one of your wives doesn't like one of your children, then you should kick out your wife and child that you don't like Sarah did to Hagar and Ishmael. I don't know if did it. Is that correct? Maybe. One might imagine that it is a good idea to not tell your fiance that you're not going to be getting married to him, and instead your sister is going to get married to him. Like Rachel and Leah did to Yaakov. I mean, there's a big question. Why didn't Rachel say, Yaakov, it's not going to be me tonight? Why didn't she say it? Was it right? Was it wrong? You might come to the conclusion that it is appropriate if you hear about a Jew fornicating with a non-Jew, that you should grab a spear and kebab them. Is that a good idea? Maybe. Say, like, if you open up a chumash and you read the stories, as certain people in the world do, and come to conclusions, how do you know that you're right? I mean, how do you know how to look at any of these things? So Baruch Hashem, we do have Masoros and Chazal about how to learn these things, but what are the sources for these things, and how do you test the theory? Like, how do you know? I mean, how do you know what you know? And certainly, how do you know if what you know is correct? And even more than that, how do we know that what Chazal knew was correct? So it's true that we have certain things that are in Masorah. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu, this is how you're supposed to understand this Agarata. I mean, this story in Bereshit should be understood like so. But then there's the whole world of like everything that Jews have thought about since then. How do you know that this is correct? How do you know how to look at the world? Like, what is the world of Jewish thought? And that is a very, very difficult thing to pin down. There are, to the best of my knowledge, no good books that do this. Meaning, there are many, 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 many systems of explaining and understanding Jewish thought. But there's no sefer that you can open up that systematizes all of machshava. I mean, there's been contemporary attempts in the last few centuries, decades, maybe last few years. But understanding machshava requires iyun in a way that learning halacha requires as well, but also requires a certain boldness and braveness to wade into uncharted territories that don't have as well-defined rules. And to then try to discover, what am I supposed to be doing here? Which raises the question of how do we learn these things? How do we begin to know these things? And how do we know that what Chazal said are true, real, accurate? How can we test these theories and apply them in other places? One of the Sfarim that we're going to be using and embarking on is the one that I have over here. This is the Shiurei Das. Shiurei Das is a sefer that was recommended to me both by Rabbi Blachman as well as my Rosh Yeshiva in South Africa, Rabbi Avram Tanza, Zeichet Tzaddik V'Kodesh V'Bracha. Rabbi Tanza was the rabbi of Yeshiva College, a high school, and I told him that I was finding out in the sefer he got a tremendous amount of nachas, because this sefer was tells in Europe. This was the shiurim of the second Rosh Yeshiva of Telz, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Leib Bloch, where he takes sugyas in Machshava. Probably the first person to do this. This is almost 160 years ago. Telz is not. Telz was lit. In the sense of they learned the Ramchal and they that opens up Shiurei Das, sees that he very clearly was well versed in Tanya back and forth. What he does in the Sefer is he takes chunks of Machshava from Midrashim and explains them, explaining how to relate to them. And we're going to be using this a lot, not exclusively, but we're going to be using this a lot. His first perek, the first shir that he has here, is titled Kichol Bashamayim Va'aretz, everything that is in heaven on earth, which is a very strange phrase, and we'll explain what this means. Kichol Bashamayim Va'aretz, because there are a number of midrashim and gemaras that don't seem to make sense. There's a famous medrash that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets a promise. He gives a promise to Avram Avinu. He says, "Al tira Avram, anechi magen lach." Don't worry, Avram, I will protect you. I'll be a shield for you. Hence the phrase Magen Abraham, the shield of Abraham. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, "I'll be your shield." What is Avram Avinu worried about? Avram Avinu is worried that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been so good to him that this is going to detract from his reward in the world to come. Everybody heard of this phrase at some point in time? He's worried that this is going to take away from my reward in the world to come. It's going to be menakeh from the zchuyos in Olam Haba. Somehow or another, I'm going to be paid for these things in this world, and I'm not going to have them in the next world. The Ramban in the Sha'ar Gmul asks the question on this medrash that doesn't make any sense at all. Because if we understand that God is infinite, and that the world to come is infinite, and that our lives are ultimately infinite, then getting paid for your reward in doing mitzvahs in this world instead of in the next world means that you are being severely underpaid. Because nothing in this world is infinite. Right? Everybody with me on the question? So, big deal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is underpaying you, except that is fundamentally inappropriate within the realm of what we declare to be a tenet of Jewish faith 3 times a day. Explain that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the Shema we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu rewards us for doing mitzvahs and punishes us for doing averos. If we do the right thing, we get reward.
It's not really a clash between having pleasure in Olam Hazeh and still getting rewarded.
Detract. Meaning
his fear, maybe not the fear of people coming for his wealth or being jealous of him having followers. Or
the Medrash says that this is what Avram was afraid of. Now, the Torah doesn't say that. The Medrash says that. And one needs to then ask the question, firstly, how do Chazal know that? And then what does that mean? Right? Chazal are telling us something here. And it sounds like what they're saying is that it is possible to get paid in this world for the things that you do in the next world. Meaning that you should be getting reward in the next world. You do mitzvahs here, you should get infinite reward, but maybe you'll get finite reward. And that not only sounds like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is cheating us, or it is possible that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would cheat us, but also, fundamentally, that means that the balance of reward and punishment of schar and onesh is not exact. And that's devastating, right? Meaning, is it possible that infinite, all-knowing God would somehow or another cheat us out of the reward that we should get? And that's a devastating question. Which means that whatever Chazal is saying, Avraham Avinu was worried about, it's very hard for us to then pass, what does that mean?
So obviously that can't be right. So what was he really worried about?
So what was he really worried about? Chazal said he was worried about losing out his reward. The question is, what do Chazal mean when they say that? Meaning, the plain and simple meaning of the words that the Medrash is telling us is that Avram was worried about this. But that sounds bizarre, because how could that be true?
Rabbi, is the point that why is he worried about something that doesn't seem to have ever been established? It's almost like he's saying, I'm worried about this, but where in the Torah did it even say that there was rewards here and rewards there? And
No, the Torah tells us that
where
we
did
get
he
reward.
come up with this concept?
Where did who come up with this concept?
Abraham.
Uh,
And he just suddenly says,
The pasuk says, "Al tira Avram anechi magen lach." Hashem says to Avram, this is a drasha on the pasuk. Don't be concerned, Avram. Don't worry. Don't fear. I will protect you. Chazal explained that pasuk. What is Avram afraid of?
also, they know what he's...
Correct. Chazal is saying what Avram is afraid of is that he is going to lose out on reward.
Doesn't explicitly say Abraham.
Doesn't say that. Which means that Chazal are interpreting this pasuk to say that. And that's the question is not on the pasuk. The question is on what Chazal mean when they say that. This is a shayla in the Medrash. What does the Medrash mean when the Medrash tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is promising Avram that he shouldn't be worried about his reward in the next world? Don't worry about it, Avram. You got plenty of reward. Don't worry. You're not detracting from your reward in the next world by all of your victories and successes and wealth and happiness in this world. Don't worry. It's not detracting from that account.
Which pasuk is this?
This is Bereshis Tesvav Pasuk Aleph.
Is the question now, where would they get that idea from to begin with? Or why would they apply that known idea to this particular situation?
Both.
Beginning of that.
Right? What does that mean? I mean, what are they saying here? Because on a fundamental level, this is problematic.
So Steinsaltz has an opinion on this.
Right? What does Steinsaltz say?
After it's after these matters, and then his commentaries after Abram's war with great kings of the north, he may have been concerned that the powerful rulers might return to Canaan for another military campaign in order to take revenge. And so then that continues the pasuk.
Right.
Is that a
So meaning,
metaphor then?
but what's he concerned about? So Chazal say is that pshat in the pasuk, obviously, is he's concerned about being attacked. But the Medrash is saying, what is his underlying concern? Is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has saved him over and over and over again.
Right.
Maybe it's not worth getting saved again.
Yeah, but he also says it I am a shield for you. I will protect you from all harm. Additionally, your future reward for your deeds is very
Right.
great.
I mean,
So
So
maybe
that's the question.
His mistake was that he wasn't thinking long term. You're being saved in order to have a people.
but
The purpose of you being saved had nothing to do with schar that you're getting now.
that might be true in the answer. But in the question is still a fundamental difficulty of how do you align the fact that Avram was concerned that he might get paid in this world for something that is eternal.
And Hashem's like, don't worry, you're getting abundance.
But don't worry about it. That's not going to happen.
Was
Yeah,
the
Hashem does-
translation for Olam Haba
But you're
the
asking-
same?
Maybe.
The
We'll get to what
Or
Olam
could it
Haba
be
means
like
another day.
just the future.
Yes.
Is
As
the
in like how
question
you
is
said, the kings.
that like the spiritual mechanics of is that even possible?
Yes.
That getting
Yes.
a reward in this world can take away from a reward in the
That is the question.
so let's
He's using the Socratic.
So I can't even-
You're saying even Avram's
It's kinda hard.
thought that was maybe wrong or answered by Hashem has to be based on a Torah structured concept. Like,
Right, because Chazal was saying that this was the conversation between Avram and Hashem. And were it to be, and this is, and we'll just take one step further, were it to be that Avram is mistaken here. So then the correct response from HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be, no, Avram, that's not how it works. He doesn't say, in some way, that is how it works.
or is it?
Is everything he did lishma if he's only thinking about it as olam haba?
Well, that's a separate question. I mean, what does that mean in terms of our being an Eved Hashem for the sake of reward, which is what the Mishnah says, novice, don't do that.
We have problems, but Avram, he wouldn't expect that to be something he would be concerned about.
And yet Chazal said that he was. Yeah, Chazal said that he
Yes,
was.
That's what I'm saying.
So we're
So-
listening into a conversation between Abraham and Hashem. We don't have the context. We don't know the before and after. But
Yeah.
because Hashem responded to him in that way, we're supposed to assume that he extrapolated something from Nevuah and go, wait, that's how it works because he responded to you
So-
that way?
So let's try and understand how this works, because we have more evidence in Chazal for the same concept. There is a story that the Gemara says, different midrashim, about Rabbi Rochana says a story about Rishon ben Chalafta, that he was very, very, very poor, very poor, and it came to one Erev Shabbos, and he had nothing to eat. And he went out to daven, and he davens and davens and davens and davens, and Min HaShamayim, he gets a stick of gold, bar of gold. Comes home and says to his Rebbetzin ben Chalafta, right? Says, guess what, darling? Min HaShamayim, they gave me a stick of gold. And she says to him, Babala, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You go put that back. Put that back. Give it back to Shamayim. Why? Because in Olam Haba, your table is going to be missing a leg. Meaning, this is detracting from your schar in Olam Haba.
It's good to be poor.
So, is that what Chazal is saying? Hold on a second. So, says Reb Shimon ben Chalafta, it says the Medrash, Reb Shimon ben Chalafta went in Nidaven, and they took it back. Shaman took it back. Now, hold on a second. How that works, I don't know how that works. But the Medrash concludes that the second miracle was greater than the first. The second miracle, the one where the gold went back to Shamayim, that was greater than the first, which raises the fundamental question: how does a person get reward in the next world here? Meaning, what does that mean? That he, from his eternal table in Olam Haba, he downloaded a gold bar for this world, and that would detract from it.
And everything that happened to Abraham could be looked at as a natural event. And this case with the gold is absolutely not teva.
Correct.
So maybe in that case, it would have detracted from his.
But still, the fundamental question of how does that make sense?
You know what this is reminding me of?
Yeah.
When some companies, when you end the year and you have extra days off,
Mm-hmm.
you can roll them over.
Yeah.
That's what this is reminding me of.
Yeah.
Like we're rolling over into Olam Haba, so don't use so much here, and you get to roll over more of that.
Yeah.
Unlimited rollover. forever.
There you go.
Just give me an analogy.
So, 100%. So how does this work? How does this work? Chevra.
Like,
Hold on,
is it
so-
that, like you use less here, like the poor rabbi?
Right.
Poor, so then he gets more.
So there is a question about the place of Talmud Torah and poverty, which in the Kochver Rabbi Shal Salanta deals with that question, because there's a piece of the conversation with Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who was exceedingly wealthy. Not for now. So what? Rabbi Shal Salanta, the founder of the Muslim movement, which is also part of the world of Machshava. No, that it was a chassid. Rabbi Shalom was the Salon Rebbe. Rabbi Shal Salanta was the founder of the Muslim movement. But he wrote a sefer Koch Ve'ar where he deals with this question in one of the problem there. But I mean the question of the poverty piece. But big adult, like big picture thinking, there is a question of what are Chazal talking about here? That it is possible to translate reward from the next world to this world. What does that mean? That is just that thing which Chazal assume is possible seems to be fundamentally antithetical to our understanding of what this world is, the next world is, what reward and punishment is, which means, and this is a very Tel's way of answering the question the way that I'm about to say it, which means that our fundamental understanding of this world, the next world, reward and punishment are wrong. There's something that we are missing here. And in order to understand this, we need to understand that the world, the Ramchal describes this at the end of the first parak and the beginning of the second parak of Derech Hashem, but it goes back much earlier to the Ramban in Bereshis, the Ibn Ezra in Hazinu. The world as we know it is Shamayim va'aretz. Bereshis bara Elokim es ha-shamayim ve'es ha'aretz. What does Shamayim mean?
Not Earth.
Not Earth. So the moon.
Included, yes. In
Space.
Shemayim, it's included.
Space.
Yeah.
Shemaim is space.
What does Aretz mean?
Land.
Land. Earth. Planet Earth.
Terrestrial.
So there was a shaila that somebody asked Rav Soloveitchik just after the moon landing, or I don't know. I think today you have to say the moon landing, right? It's
Oh,
right.
Well,
So-
no, soon.
This is if I say it's a conspiracy
Well,
theory, that's good for the algorithm, no?
What?
If it's a conspiracy theory, then it's good for the
Yeah.
algorithm, right? You have to say conspiracy theory. It's, right? Somebody came up to Rav Soloveitchik and said to him, is it mutter for men to land on the moon? Is it mutter? Why? Because the pasuk says, Shamayim la Hashem, va'aretz nasan livnei Adam. Shamayim belongs to Hashem, and Aretz He gave to mankind. Shamayim la Hashem, va'aretz nasan livnei Adam. So,
You're thinking flying an airplane.
Correct.
But you're
Right.
thinking purely in terms of physical.
Yeah, Shemaim also means
So-
sky.
so said Rav Soloveitchik, from the question, it's clear that you haven't read the Ramban in Bereshis, because the Ramban says Shamayim means the non-physical world. Aretz means the physical world, meaning the universe. The entirety of the physical universe is called Aretz. Everything else is called Shamayim.
The sky is Shemaim.
So there is Shamayim and there is Shamayim. And this is an important thing to understand in Chumash and in life. And that's not the only example. In fact, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of the same thing. And I'll give you a number of examples. If I want to explain that there is a thought that is very complex, I might tell you that the thought is very deep. What does deep mean?
Deep within your mind.
Meaning somebody drilled a hole into your brain?
It means that it takes a lot of thought to try to
Complex.
comprehend it.
So,
You gotta dig a little bit.
Complexity.
dig?
Oh.
Metaphorically dig.
Metaphorically dig, right?
You gotta dig. It's a voda.
Language is descriptive only to a certain degree. I mean, we can't.
So language is descriptive only to a certain degree, which is the degree of the physical world. Everything that we describe in the non-physical world borrows metaphors from the physical world. Everything. in multiple stages. So this example I've given from time to time before, but today we know that the definition of light is photons, right? I know what light is physically. I can say that there is light in the room. But if I read a story and I said, well, I went to a movie and I said, the movie was very dark. Does that mean that the lights were off? What does that mean? I say the story was very dark. It's hard to read the page because
It's emotionally dark.
emotionally dark.
You're referencing a word that you're not saying, basically.
Meaning, I don't have a word to describe the emotion,
We don't have a choice. We have to use the language we have.
but
Which
I use the
describes
word.
the physical.
Right. Meaning I'm borrowing from that which I can experience with my five senses to describe something that I cannot experience with my five
I'm
senses.
sure there's a word in English to describe that feeling, though, or describe that. Like, dark is just the easiest way to explain it with the words that most people know.
Right. But understand that dark is a metaphor,
Right.
right? And if you would look that up in the dictionary, whatever multisyllabic German word they use to describe that emotion, you'll probably find that it is ultimately referencing a physical metaphor.
Yeah, you understand it through first it's like if you felt empty or like something's illuminated, you understand first that illuminating, like a light shows you something, but an idea can be illuminated. First, as a child, though, you probably have to understand, like, light turns on, I see something. And then you can, as an adult, understand, oh, now I can see an idea or understand something.
So that's already another level. You can have physical light, you can have emotional light, you can have intellectual enlightenment, which came after the Dark Ages.
So like I said, moving from Toronto to here, I feel lighter. I'm not even joking. I see my depression has lifted,
Right.
and I feel lighter.
Right.
So the sunlight every morning literally is me feel lighter.
Same thing
Tap
for
water. Florida tap water.
So the point of that is that everything that you said we understand,
Right.
and none of those things
It's all physical.
are your emotions and feelings. They are all metaphors and references.
Yeah.
Well, that's our limitation. We don't have
Right.
to find a way to
So they
describe
can
it.
either, like, weight-wise,
So Shemayim is really just supposed to be the,
brighter.
I guess, not slang term, but sort of like
Yeah, so it's easier.
the unreachable. That it's just the stuff that's way up there that we can't reach. And it's not supposed to be taken literally, as in like, well, we did go to the moon, or
Right.
we did fly up there. It's just supposed to be I'm on the ground, and Shemayim meaning the unreachable up there.
So not necessarily unreachable.
Unreachable as in for now. In while you're on
So-
Haaretz,
so-
unreachable.
That which is distinct from my
That I can't climb up
current-
a tree and like grab
my
it.
current
Clearly,
situation.
Light and dark are pretty unique in that. Like, light can mean a lot of different things.
So all of my body is
But-
more accurate.
But we speak about like things that are going up and things that are going down. We talk about things that are elevated, right? That person is an elevated individual, like they live at a high altitude, right?
Spiritually.
That's a deep person. He's a very deep guy because he works in a mine, right? All of our language, everything that we use to describe anything non-physical borrows terms from the physical world.
The Torah also uses that.
Absolutely.
Like Yaakov's dream with the Sulam and all that.
Correct.
Otherwise, how would we possibly
A lot of
understand?
personification.
So,
Yad Hashem.
correct, which the Rambam speaks about extensively. What exactly does Yad
There
Hashem
was
mean?
some Rishonim who felt it was literal, right? I don't know.
Sort of. Ralbag arguably
Oh.
makes the point, well, Kraskos and Ralbag arguably make the point that it would be limiting to Hashem to say that he couldn't do that. That's probably the best way of understanding it. We'll get there.
In Yitzias Mitzrayim, there's a lot of examples of Al-Kafin Sharon or things like that.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of open metaphor. That's obvious. But the closed metaphor is far more interesting in this context. I mean, we have met even what I just said, open and closed, in reference to metaphors. You know what I'm talking about. But-
I want you to explain.
Okay, so open metaphors would be Hashem is taking us out of Egypt al kanfei nesharim, on eagle's wings. We did not leave Egypt on the eagle's wings.
It's like all the Yemenites that were flying on a plane,
Right.
setting that going to Israel after
So
1948.
we didn't leave Egypt on kanfei nesharim. Right? Whatever it was, we left Egypt. It wasn't kanfei nesharim. It wasn't wings of eagles, or arguably vultures, depending on how you want to translate that. But that's less majestic, I suppose.
It's a foreshadowing to
The wings
planes
of
that will
Slav.
take us out of
Right.
America and into the-
Maybe, right? But that's an open metaphor. Closed metaphor is Yad Hashem is an open metaphor. But when we talk about that, a person is light or dark or enlightened, or that a person is experiencing something deep, to describe a profundity of thought. All of those things are metaphors, and they're closed metaphors, and we don't even realize that they're metaphors. But this is where things get interesting. It's because up until now, we are assuming that we borrow language from physical reality to describe metaphysical, spiritual, lofty, elevated, higher, shamayim. But the truth is, and this the Baal HaTanya explains at length in the second Chelik of Tanya, is that it goes the other way around. Language goes the other way around. And I'll explain what I mean. At the beginning, in that chain of things that we refer to as R, from photons to emotional light, to intellectual illumination, to spiritual enlightenment, which one did Hashem create first?
Spiritual light.
Right. Which means light as we experience it in the physical world is a manifestation of the Or that Hashem created at the beginning of creation.
Power derivation.
Both. And that's the point. Is that on a fundamental, total perspective, there is no difference between physical photons and spiritual enlightenment and emotional lightness and intellectual enlightenment. There is no difference between those things except for where it is experienced.
So they share the same properties on different levels.
They are the same thing depending on where.
So global warming is because we're bringing more light into this world.
Well, warmth might not be the same thing as light, but I'll give you the following example to try to flesh this out a little bit, because this is a little bit mind-bending. Is that different people can experience the same event on totally different levels. If you have, the world's best orchestra playing the most complex piece of music, and you are a master musician, you will experience that on one level. And if you are a casual listener of classical music, you will experience that on another level. And if you are a child that likes nursery rhymes, you will experience that on another level entirely. It's all the same experience. It is simply a question of who is experiencing that thing and in what way they are experiencing it. It's the same thing.
The simplest may be the purest form of experience also.
Perhaps. But the same thing could be said about food, right? And all complex pleasure, I mean, a kid will prefer, like, you know, chicken nuggets and ketchup to Wagyu steak. And we'd say to that kid, please God, one day, right, you'll appreciate good food. Like, and because his taste buds are not developed enough to appreciate that thing. Now, there is a purity to it, but there's also a simplicity to it and a lack of complexity, which means that he cannot derive pleasure to the same extent from that thing. Which means that he's lacking. Because were it to be that the kid could appreciate it, he would enjoy more.
Not necessarily. On his ability to appreciate, he might be at the highest level.
Correct. At his ability to appreciate. And he's going to look at people going, oh my gosh, the steak is amazing. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh my God, this music is phenomenal, transcendent, the greatest possible recording, of any piece of music in the history of ever. This is sublime. And you'll be like, I like Baba Black Sheep.
Who's better?
So 100%.
It also comes because of you're seeking it out because you've experienced it
Right.
before, right? Like the kid that's had chicken nuggets, they were introduced only to chicken nuggets.
Correct.
So they're not yet seeking out the steak. If they were introduced to the steak at the age of 3, maybe by the age of 7, they'd have a very sophisticated taste bud.
Arguably, yes.
Yeah.
Or on a biological level, maybe it's not possible even to develop those things by that stage. I don't know. Right? But here's the nakuda. And this is the secret to this whole conversation, is that there is no difference between the reward that you get for a mitzvah in this world and the reward that you get for a mitzvah in the next world. It is simply a question of to be. And I'll care about their spiritual world. Doesn't care. Somebody that spends their life not seeking out spiritual growth and enlightenment, but seeking out hedonistic pleasure. The appropriate place to reward them is the place that they will experience that reward in the greatest way. Meaning, somebody that has no sophistication of pleasure beyond their hedonistic tendencies, somebody that doesn't enjoy something more than that. It happened to be that one day they did something wonderful. They saved somebody's life. They gave money to tzedakah, whatever. Not because they are spiritually enlightened, because at that point in time, they did a wonderful thing, meaning they were mekayim a mitzvah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not take away that mitzvah from anybody. That mitzvah is yours. Question is, where do you want to be paid? Do you want to be paid in the context of this world, or do you want to be paid in the context of the next world? It is the same thing, but the further down the chain it goes, the more limited it is.
In other words, that could be it for you.
That's exactly what it means.
So Abraham's concern was,
It's a legitimate concern.
why am I getting it now if I don't have it?
He
I
says-
don't care about this.
He says, Ribbana Shalom, if you're, and this is what Chazal is saying here, I'm worried that you are doing all of these things for me in this world
Because you're cutting me off.
because I haven't achieved enough that it would be worth it for you. Meaning, I'm
He's
not.
worried about his capacity.
Yeah. He's saying, Ribbana Shalom, you're doing so much for me here. I know that I've done great things. I know that. Avraham Avinu is not saying that he's not worth it.
Where I thought I was.
But maybe this is it. Meaning, maybe this. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, Avraham, the opposite is true. not only have you filled up and are you creating a world, and this is part 3, 4, 5, 7, like meaning of this discussion. The Aruch HaKodesh, we discussed this last Shabbos for a minute, is that if a person is filling up their capacity in Olam Haba, that spills over into Olam Hazeh because there is a unity between all worlds. That's what Avram Avinu is experiencing. Is that Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba are melding and merging together for him. It's not that this world is detracting from the next world, but that's exactly what's happening in the conversation with Rabbi Shimon bar Chalafta. He says, Rebbe Shalom, I need you to help me. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu hands him a brick of gold, and his wife says to him, you just translated infinity into this world. Which means that you're saying, I'd like it here instead. And no judgment on somebody suffering through poverty, saying, I need you to give me.
Why isn't that?
Because he's saying, Rebbe Shalom, give it to me here, and Hashem is saying to him, Rebbe Shimon bar Chalafta, your job right now is to do what you're doing in the state that you are. If you want this, what you're saying is that this world is more important to you than what you're building.
But if it's the same, why can't that?
It's not
Why
required, but
can't
it's
that
admirable.
gold bar have an effect?
Why can it be in both places?
Yeah.
Because he's not holding where Avram Avinu was holding. Right? And that's what Chazal say, that the second miracle was much greater than the first, because light goes from Vayhi Or of Hashem to photons. But to get from photons back to Vayhi Or, that's very difficult. Right? How do you go back up the chain? Meaning, how do you translate the physical world back into the spiritual world?
That was his wife.
Give the
That's
gold,
what Rebbitzin-
give
Well,
the
his
gold
Rebbetzin
bar,
said to him, go give it
I was
back.
just gonna say that.
Right?
give the gold bar to
She's the
Tzedakah.
one that was able
So,
to-
by the way, but that's not what happened. Meaning, Pasha, he didn't say, I'm going to give it to tzedakah.
That's the way to get back in there.
No, it daf cannot. The point is that this now has come from your Olam Haba. Put it back there. I mean, once it's come into this world, it's not in that world anymore. You've severed that. But this conversation.
It's like downloading it into the matrix.
So
Correct.
You can't upload it out.
How do you upload? I mean, that's traumatic, right? It's difficult to re-upload it out of the matrix. But here's the Nakuda, and this is the secret of this whole conversation. We asked the question at the beginning of how do we know what we know? How do Chazal know what they know? And the secret to this whole Seder HaLimud is that there are two sources of knowledge. There is one source of knowledge, which is we know what was above, and therefore we know what is below. And that's Masar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told things to Moshe Rabbeinu told them to us. There are certain things that we know because we have Masar in what to think and how to think. That is, I don't know what percentage, but a certain percentage of what we know in the world of Machshava. But then there is another world of Machshava entirely, which is understanding what goes on above through understanding what goes on below. Meaning that when Chazal, Chachamim in all generations, but certainly from Chachmei Mishnah and Gemara, that are not talking about, we're not talking about Nevi'im that got from above to below. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu explained things to them. There is another world of Chachma, which is the world of understanding what is going on here, and knowing that that is a derivation of and a description of, a translation of that which is above. Which means, how do we know what Gan Eden and Gehenna and Olam Haba and Malachim and Mashiach, how do we know what all of these things are? Some of it is because we were told above to below. Kodesh Baruch Hu told us. And some of it comes from a deep and profound understanding of this world. From that, we now have the ability to understand what's going on above. And I'll give you an example to illustrate. Chazal tell us that the Malachim were created on day 2. Angels were created on day 2 of creation. Now, no one was there. So how do you know? How do you know? How do Chazal know that? How do you know that Malachim were created on day 2?
What do you mean? How do they know whatever was created day one?
The Torah tells us that Bereshit bara Elokim es hashamayim v'haaretz, and then it describes day 1.
Because no one's there, human?
Yeah. How do we know what was created on day 2?
Not evident in Torah.
Torah doesn't say that the angels were created on
How do
day
we know
2.
anything?
Didn't the Malachim ask something around day 2?
How do we know?
I'm saying, didn't they ask a question and you just go, oh, they
You
appeared
say
there.
Chazal are telling us that the angels were created on day
How do
2.
they learn it out?
Right.
Is there proof for it?
That's my question. What's the proof?
Yeah, could get into that.
Yeah.
That's Noah's question.
So this is the answer.
Return.
This is the answer.
Torah motion is.
One option is HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu. But another option, and this is probably the more accurate answer, is that maybe Hashem told that to Moshe, maybe he didn't. But how do you know it? I'll tell you how you know it. You know it because if you walk into an office and you want to meet with the CEO, you need to leave something on the CEO's desk. And there are no name tags on any of the doors. And you walk into a big office, 15th floor of a building in Manhattan, and you want to know, on this floor, there's a company that runs out of this floor. Which office belongs to the CEO? So you walk around, and the biggest.
Most windows.
Gives it prestige,
There's
The
a
view.
secretary on the outside,
Seclusion.
not to make sure
And-
people don't walk in.
and
Seclusion, like its own
And-
space.
when you go in, there is only one desk. If you walk into an office and there are 2 equal desks there, is that where the CEO sits?
No.
No, why not?
CEO doesn't share a room.
Doesn't share it. Why not?
When Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David
Jerry.
wrote together.
Right?
Show
They were
superior.
co-
But they were not CEOs.
They were co-CEOs.
They weren't CEOs. They were writers. They didn't own it.
To show
Right?
superiority?
Because, and this is the secret to this whole conversation. The nature of people and the nature of the entirety of animal life on planet Earth is that at the top there is only one. That's true throughout the animal kingdom. There is only one alpha lion. Right? There's only one in the pack. There is only one lion. That's the king. There's wolves hunt in packs, but there's one that's in charge. Throughout the Bria, there is, at the top of everything, there is one. So Chazal looked at the world and concluded that the Malachim were created on day 2. Because were it to be that the Malachim were created on day 1, the nature of reality would be that the top could have multiple things. Meaning that there is a distance in creation between the one and the many. There is a distance. There has to be a distance because that is reflective of our existence. The Ramchal writes, and this is the beginning of Derech Hashem, the Ramchal writes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has, at least as we experience HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a teva tov leitiv. He has a nature to do good. How does he wants to create? How do Chazal know that the Ribono Shel Olam wants to create, wants to make more things? Not just man. Everything does. Everything alive in the universe wants to propagate, wants to make more. Where does that teva come from? It is irrational. It is illogical. Single-celled amoeba want to reproduce. Why? Because that is the teva, that is the nature of existence. And if that is the nature of existence, then that means that it was programmed, it was put there as the nature of existence, which means that from the nature of existence, we can understand the Ribono Shalom. Because there are two ways that we know things. We know things top down, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told the Nevi'im, because the Nevi'im understood and they wrote it down. Or because we understand the world with all of its depth, profundity, and complexity, and then we understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because light is all of light, and dark is all of dark, and water is all of water.
Doesn't this maybe limit Hashem then? If like we're saying, okay, the rules of this world are now going to apply in Shemayim.
They don't apply. They are reflective of the rules, so to speak, in Shemayim.
But Hashem doesn't want. We're personifying him by saying that.
Our experience of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as wanting is legitimate. Whether, and the Baal HaTanya spells this out explicitly, what happens in the world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is beyond our capacity to ascertain or to experience is beyond. But what Hashem wants us to experience of him is very clear. He tells us in the Torah. He wants us to experience him. That doesn't mean that that is exclusive. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Echad Yachad Miyuchad. He is one complete, wholesome God. Our experience of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he tells us exactly how he wants us to experience him. And the whole world is an expression of everything that Hashem creates. Which means that Chazal know this because they know how the world works. And when you peer into reality and see godliness, so you can understand if this is human nature, and if this is the nature of the world, then I can understand the nature of God. Now it happens to be that there is an intermediary step for us. Chazal knew how to do this. We don't necessarily know how to do this, which is why we don't look at the world and say, this is what God wants from me.
There's also a lot of evil in the world, so you
Yes.
don't know what you're looking at.
Correct. Meaning to understand what is a reflection of God and what is a deviation from it. And that is a big sugya, which we'll get to, the question of theology and philosophy is the problem of evil. But practically speaking, our sources of knowledge, when it comes to the world of Machshava, how do we know what we know? We know what we know from two places, top down and bottom up. We know these things because people thought. Do we know them because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told this to Moshe Rabbeinu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told this to the Nevi'im, and they wrote it into Yechezkel, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu. They wrote it in, and that's how we know. I mean, where do we know these things from? And the confluence of those things, of Chazal overwhelmingly quoting psukim and then explaining them, is the meeting point of these things, which is the place of our learn, is taking that which we understand from above to be true, and that which we are experiencing from below, and understanding how those things match up. That's what Hashem is explaining to us. I mean, Chazal explained to us in this passage. Avram Avinu is afraid. We know in the Torah that Avram is afraid. So on one level, he is afraid of the war about the kings, but on a much deeper level, he's concerned about his place in the world. And this is, of course, the role of multiple levels of understanding Chumash, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, which are all levels of the same Torah. They're not independent of each other. Like the Vilna Gaon points out in a number of places, chief amongst them, Sefer Mishlei, that if you have a contradiction between the pshat in the pasuk and the sod in the pasuk, then you are not understanding it properly. You're missing something. It cannot be that the pshat of the pasuk contradicts the deeper meaning of it.
Or the opposite.
Right.
Trying to extrapolate some mystical meaning, but it's not logical, rational, based on, or based on basic shot, then you might be just making something up.
Right. They need to stem with each other. Now, it's not always the case that everybody can understand the links between these things. Baruch Hashem, we have Chachamim throughout the generations that tell us things even if we don't understand it. But my point here is to explain that when you see something and hear something, so firstly, it's worthwhile to ask the question of where it comes from. But secondly, to understand that sometimes Chazal tell us things and we have no idea where they got it from. Where does that come from? Where does that idea come from? And the question that we then need to ask is, what are they fundamentally telling us that we're missing here? Because they are now either understanding something top down or something bottom up. Because this has to make sense. There is a direct line from Bereshit bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz to the existence of this book, which is every bracha that you make on eating an apple. You make a bracha borei pri ha'etz. You created the fruit of the tree, which means that at the beginning of creation, you said Tacha haaretz desha, that the world should sprout forth vegetation. This has landed in this apple. This is the whole trajectory of everything goes back to creation, that there's a God in the world, and I recognize it because there's an apple. There is a sin that Chazal described, and you'll see this in the Perush HaRamban al Torah, that crops up many, many times throughout Sefer Bereshis and throughout the Torah. What Chazal referred to as kotzitz b'netios, cutting off the plants. Like this is what the people in the Mabul wanted to do, and the people in the Tower of Babylon wanted to do. They wanted to cut off the plants. What does that mean? Simple explanation is they wanted to say that fruit comes from Costco. It doesn't come from trees.
The milk is it's from the store.
Correct.
It's not from the truck that uses gasoline to get from the
Right.
farm. I understand how gas prices make my milk more expensive.
Right. Right. That's kotzitz b'netios, is where you only want to look at the superficial of the world. You don't want to look at that which is beyond it. Because if you look at that which is beyond it, you'll understand that the apple doesn't come from Costco. It comes from the branch. And the branch doesn't come from, the lumber store. It comes from a tree. And the tree didn't come from the ground. It came from roots. And those roots suck up nutrients. Meaning that there's a system, this stuff that's going on here. And it grew from a seed that germinated into roots and a stem and that seed came from somewhere. And when you think about it for a moment, you understand that when you eat an apple, you're experiencing creation.
The laws of nature determine how that's going to grow. So
Right.
Those were created by control.
Not just the laws, but the seed itself came from somewhere.
The processing and the thing.
Right? In a very mind-bending meta state, the experience of eating an apple is one part of the universe consuming another part of the universe. Right? And all of that is tracing itself back to Bria. Or as some philosophers have pointed out, the experience of thinking is the universe considering itself. Right? Because we are nivraim, we are created beings that are contemplating the source of our own creation that is cyclical in nature. It's the emergence of intellect, all of this, because everything is sourced in one thing. And when you break that apart, that becomes devastating. Ki chol b'shamayim v'aretz, that's how Pasuk says in Divrei Hayam, everything that is above is below. Shamayim and aretz are a manifestation of the same source of all things. Which means that sometimes we will understand well where Chazal got things from, sometimes we won't. But to know that this is sourced in Shamayim and or Aretz is important to put in perspective. You'll see this in that link that I sent out with the sources You'll see this. This is in the Mahara. This is in the Ramchal and the Aruch Hashem. This is in the Maharal. A whole bunch of places, but it's in the Tanya and Sharich Be'emunah. This understanding that all things come from one thing and are not distinct from it in one expression of it means that when you understand one thing, you understand all things, which the Ibn Ezra describes how Moshe Rabbeinu, that understanding is how Moshe Rabbeinu did miracles. Not for now. We'll get to that Ibn Ezra another day. But yeah.
It's like Shamayim, doesn't it? I forget where. Shamayim?
Yes.
And my daughter's obsessed with this book, The Magic School Bus, where they learn about the water cycle.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the water here on Earth is going up, evaporating, and then rain, and it comes down. And this is a cycle. It's like the exact same idea. How, like, our world and then Shamayim, but it's like even in this physical world, you see
the same thing.
like,
Correct.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That which is above is below, and that which is below is above. You experience all of it.
Yeah.
That there is a cycle to everything. And extrapolating that to the non-physical world, it's exactly the same thing. Which Rav Nachman writes is the secret of Hanukkah, is understanding that's why you spin a dreidel.
Wait, what?
Why you spin a dreidel. Because a nun could be a shin, could be a gimel, could be a hay. Just depends where it lands. But it's spinning, because the place that this thing all part of the same one thing. And if you can understand that well and peer into that deeply and profoundly, then you gain a much greater understanding of that which is above through understanding that which is below. There's a billion more things to say, but this is part one. We'll see you next week.
Deep for part one. It's like
Great.